The Chula Vista City Council met on Tuesday, but Councilwoman Andrea Cardenas was absent. She wasn't there, and some folks were upset about it. We reported last week that Chula Vista Mayor John McCann and another city councilman had called on her to resign, and now community members are demanding some of the same. The whole scandal has put a bright light on Cardenas and her brother, Jesus Cardenas. I talked about it a little bit last week, but I think we need to get a little bit deeper.
Let's go.
So Jesus Cardenas was the chief of staff for Stephen Whitburn. Now, the chiefs of staff are a big deal. Like they're basically the boss of the office. Obviously, the council people are the bosses, but the staffs are truly run by the chief of staff. The chief of staff handles all the dirty work, all the tough political decisions that have to come into play, all the negotiating behind the scenes, all of that stuff goes through the chief of staff's office, right? Like, depending, now obviously some of the council members delegate more to that person, some delegate less, but it's a big role. In fact, it used to be, I'm not quite sure it's the same, but it used to be that the chiefs of staff made significantly higher salaries than the actual city council members. They got paid like $70,000. The chiefs of staff would sometimes make well over $100,000. So I think now that's changed as the salaries have gone up for the city council members. But the point is like these are big jobs.
They're the showrunners.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're the showrunners for all that happens. And so Jesus Cardenas was that for Stephen Whitburn. Now, this last week, of course, or 2 weeks ago, the district attorney accused Jesus Cardenas and Andrea Cardenas of fraudulently applying for one of those PPP loans. And we talked about that. Those were basically grants that were given to businesses for keeping their employees on payroll during COVID. And they accused him of claiming 34 employees that were actually employees of Harbor Collective, a cannabis retailer. So that was a big deal. But that reminded me that there have always been questions about Jesus Cardenas' connection to the cannabis industry and Harbor in particular. And if you look at his Form 700, these are the disclosures they have to put out every year about their own financial interests so that people can see if they're conflicted or not. On his 2021 disclosure, he lists Harbor Collective and two other interest groups, or let's see, one other retailer and another interest group from the cannabis industry as giving him more than $10,000 or $10,000 or more in income.
So minimum $30,000.
Exactly. And so, again, he's doing this job. He's getting this income that he's already disclosed. And now we have the accusation that he was even more related or partnered with this cannabis company than we previously knew. But at that same time, 2021, Whitburn's office, again, the office that Cardenas is managing, was pushing forward a big change to the laws in San Diego about cannabis. Right now, they allowed a certain number of cannabis facilities per district, right? Per city council district. It was 4. There's 9 districts. That's 36.
Right.
But they were only at that point seeing about 26 to 20, I think it was 25 to 27 or something retailers. And so there was a lot of pressure for them to get the other 10, right? And Whitburn was trying to vastly change where these sites would be located because they had to be 1,000 feet away from playgrounds, 1,000 feet away from schools, 1,000 feet from residential and churches and all these things. And Whitburn's idea was to allow it to be 600 feet for a lot of those uses and no distance for a lot of other uses, especially like the senior facilities or the playgrounds. They didn't need a buffer, churches. And so he wanted to put that forward. He also wanted to let them stay open longer and other things. And he pushed that forward. And he got it to the city's planning commission. And the planning commissioners on December 9th, 2021, they were like, why is this? Why it goes to the planning commission, and they asked Whitburn's staff member, they're like, why is this coming up now? Because we look and it's supposed to go to the city council in just a few hours here. Like, are we just rubber stamps for you here? Like, what about our input? What about the community planning groups? Aren't you going to go and do any of those things? And they're like, and at that point, the staffer for Whitburn says to them, well, if you had a problem, we would have just canceled this meeting. And he goes through all the ways they tried to get this meeting together before the city council meeting. And if you'd had a problem, we would have just canceled it.
Right. He lays out that it was more of a scheduling issue, that it's not that they think it's a rubber stamp or whatever. They tried to get on their agenda earlier, but they just couldn't. And it just happens that the day they got on their agenda, they also have the city council meeting.
In the meeting, they say to him, you got to go to these community planning groups. You've got to go to these other places and get more input. And he's like, okay. But then that afternoon, Stephen Whitburn is at city council. He's the chair of the Land Use and Housing Commission. There has been a new city council president elected by the colleagues of the city council in the days before that. So Whitburn did not support that new city council president, Sean Elo Rivera.
So he's maybe going to lose his chairmanship
So
here
he
of the
feels
committee.
he's not a dumb guy. He knows that in a few days he's probably not going to be the chair of this committee. And he puts forward, he says, I would like to move that this amendment be adopted and moved to the full city council for approval. Now, again,
This is after it went to planning. And planning didn't like
hours after.
A few hours after the planning commission had said, like, bro,
don't love it.
Slow your roll. You need to, like, take this to different places. So I wrote that whole thing because to me it indicated, like, A, the chief of staff has now even more connections, according to the DA, to the cannabis industry than we knew about. B, it seems like they had some urgency to get this change done.
Yes.
And C, there's no more important principle in local government ethics than that you don't work on something that you are getting income from or that you have a financial interest in, right? If you have a farm and you're working on a rule about rezoning farms that might change the value of your property significantly, you kind of need to back off that decision.
Sure. Can we talk about, tell us about the urgency, Scott, because that's the part that's interesting to me. You've got this chief of staff who's making quite a bit of money from the cannabis industry, and you have his council member, Whitburn, who represents downtown, and they're pushing this thing forward pretty hard, almost clumsily, right?
Well, when he makes the motion,
desperately,
he makes this motion at city council, at this land use and housing commission, and it's like crickets. Like nobody's like second. No, there's
that's always awkward in city meetings.
Why do you think that is? Why were people not willing to support this?
Well, the stated reason was that they wanted to see the city embark on and create the infrastructure of an equity program, right? One of the big things with cannabis is it used to be illegal, and the people who disproportionately got punished because of its prohibition were people of color mostly, and thus you should have some sort of program in place to make sure that now that it's legal, the people making money from it are not just the people who didn't get punished when in the before times, right?
Right.
So that was their stated reason. We should do that before we increase access too much, right? But there was clearly some like discomfort about it. Now, I wrote all that up.
Connecting the dots.
I wrote all that up in the politics report. Comes out every Saturday. It's a great piece of journalism, right?
Plug.
Frequently it is. You know, last Saturday's was good, very good.
Thanks, Will. I say nice things about Will. So that came out Monday. I got a call and I got a letter from Whitburn, and he was upset with the characterization. One, I had transcribed the quote of what that staffer had said to the planning commission. I had transcribed it slightly wrong, and he was saying that was a big deal. Like if the way I had written it, it sounded like a pledge that they wouldn't go to the full city council with it. And what he was saying is, no. It was just like, had you had a problem with it, we wouldn't go to the city council. Like it was a past tense.
Right.
But the principle is still there.
Sure.
If the planning commission has a problem with it, it shouldn't go to the city council yet, right?
Yeah, those two letters and an apostrophe really don't seem to make that much of a
right. It went from
difference.
would to would've, right?
Yeah.
From would to would've and cancel to canceled.
But if the
we
principle
would have
is still
just
there,
canceled, as opposed to we would just cancel.
Right.
So I will fully admit I transcribed that wrong.
It happens.
I'm not sure it had the implication that he thinks it does, or the distinction he did. But the other issue he took issue was the idea that he was urgent about this. He's like, "Nah, man, I didn't care.
It was
Cool.
chill.
Yeah, he's just vibing.
I was trying since December to get this schedule, or September to get this schedule. I had no urgency about it. I was not upset when it didn't go through." And
So he was saying he would have been happy to go back through the process of taking it all to those community groups.
yeah.
Okay.
And my only response to that was, you, despite the concern of the Planning Commission, a few hours earlier, you moved that it go forward. To me, that is de facto, like, or just sort of like, how do you say it? Like prima facie, like evidence that you are trying to like make it happen. And that's an urgent thing, because regardless of whether you're going to be on that committee or not, like you're pushing it right then.
The Planning Commission asked you to pump the brakes, and your response is, get this thing to council.
Yeah, exactly. So the regulations never went forward, and now the equity program, by the way, is like not doing well either. So, but again, it wouldn't have increased the number of retailers allowed in San Diego. It would have helped them reach the limit that already exists.
Yeah, by eliminating distances between areas. And I mean, maybe that's a good thing. Like,
Yeah, I actually personally think that that's probably something that would be okay.
I don't see why it's like wrong to leave a church and want to smoke a fatty, you know? Sue me,
Or
I guess.
before you go in.
Well, it's so funny.
You may see
Feeling
God
the
that
right
much
way.
more vividly.
I only go to church if there's like a corn man selling.
That little cup of wine ain't enough, dude. It ain't enough.
Well, isn't it funny though that this actually brings up a funny point to me. Like, everybody always treats in these regulations cannabis retailers as though it's like a bar, right?
Yeah.
As though it's like a similar type use.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you go there and you're partying, you come out stumbling or something.
Yeah.
It's the most boring retailer that exists, right? People go in, they buy it and they leave in a second. They're not hanging out. They're not smoking.
Well, and it does, especially now, they all feel like substance Apple stores.
Yeah.
You know? Like you go in there and it feels like you're buying a thing of AirPods.
You're going to the genius bar of weed.
Well, and to be fair, those people are geniuses when it comes
They
to
are.
weed.
No, I mean that literally. Yeah.
But it's but to regulate it as though it does like have this impact the way a bar does or way a concert venue has or whatever. It's like
Weird to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I get like schools. Maybe you don't want kids to pop over and try to make something happen. But they're pretty serious about the ID, too. I think a lot more than liquor stores are.
For sure.
They seem very serious about it. They seem like they're making plenty of money following the rules just as they are.
Yeah.
And we aren't living in like the Wild West of dispensaries that San Diego used to have. I
Dude,
remember
that was crazy.
when I was 18.
Like,
oh man, it was
09 or 10.
Yes.
It was wild.
This is
It was-
pre-legalization?
Yeah,
well, this was medical.
It was
This was when it was
medical.
medical, and there was. I remember I got my medical card at this spot where right across the next door over, the place next door was the dispensary, and so I got my medical card.
Yeah.
Like walked
Sounds
next
legit.
door, and they like just have a bong sitting there. Everybody can hit it. And thinking back now after a pandemic, like that is
Sounds
Never
gross.
happened
Do
again.
you want to hear my story?
yeah, of course.
Should we do this? Am I going to get fired?
No, I don't know.
So
You will.
I went,
I definitely want to hear it now.
Are you gonna fire yourself, Scott?
I went to get my card, and the doctor was he was like, "Hey, well, what do you?" He was really blitzed out, like just this, like he looked like his hair had been in the sun for 40 years, and he said, "Well, how do you primarily like to ingest cannabis?" And I was like, honestly, I've been making my own brownies lately. And he's like, "Oh, that's really good, except I'm really worried about something for you." And I was like, "Oh, what?" And he goes, "The gluten, man."
Say it one more time, though, but the gluten, man.
Yeah, it was exactly like that. And I was like, "Wow, okay. Well, I'll keep that in mind." Yeah. He's like, and then he proceeded to tell me how to make like my own gummies or something with the glycerin. And I was like, "All right, man, thanks."
That's awesome.
Thanks,
Genius
brother.
bar.
That is
Thanks,
such
brother
a
doctor.
great.
Yeah. Wasn't that funny, that period though, where you
Oh, it was-
you had to
It wasn't
You had
funny.
to-
It was awesome.
you get like this transactional doctor
Yeah.
appointment where they'd say like, do you sleep? Do you breathe?
When I went in, yeah, that was basically it. I was like 18. I was all nervous, and I was tired of getting ripped off like by the guy who would hang out behind the CVS or whatever. And I went in, and I'm like, I would like a medical card, and he's like, okay, what's been going on with you? And I just kind of like froze, and he's like, okay, well, most people when they come in here, they say I've been feeling anxious, or I've been having trouble sleeping, or my appetite isn't great, and I
My
was
vibe's
like,
not right.
yeah, and I was like, well, yeah, totally, that's me. And he's like, all right, I'll write that down.
God. Wait, okay. To bring it back.
Yes.
Wow.
Fine.
Wow.
She's like, I have no pot stories.
For your original piece, you
Yeah.
did ask them what role Jesus Cardenas played.
Yes, because this is the only thing that really matters.
Yes.
Did he work on this regulation?
What did they say?
I cannot recall.
No, so
I don't know her.
I asked again. He was really upset after the piece ran, but he didn't take any time to talk to me before the piece ran, and I gave him a lot of days to talk about it. So they sent me first a statement about how much he cared about the issue, really trying to refute the point that he was only pursuing the issue because of his chief of staff, right?
Sure.
And so but then I had to follow up and say, like, well, what about the chief of staff? Did he work on this? Because if he didn't, that would be significant, if he recused himself or whatever. And they said, given the circumstance that he finds himself in, we're not going to comment. Mm-hmm. And so all this blow up after the piece ran, again, there was no point refuting that. So I think we can deduce that they did let him work on it and that he did work on this. And that seems like it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it might play out. It might have some further impact in this discussion about the scandal going forward. So after the story ran, I did a piece sort of responding to the response, and I described it as Whitburn demanded a retraction because he had demanded a retraction.
Yeah.
A retraction, to be clear, is the most.
You're saying this is wrong. Get it off.
This is the
website.
There's three levels for you out there of journalism modifications, right? Well, there's four. The first is an update. Something new has happened. You're just updating it, right?
Yes.
The second is a clarification. Like, hey, I wrote something. It's not untrue, but to further help you understand it, and I'm going to clarify it, right?
Yes.
And then there's a correction. Like, I wrote something that was untrue, and here's the correct version of that.
Then the last would be like you have to take the story down.
The
because
last is a retraction. The whole story is so egregiously wrong that it must be removed, and we must explain why. That happens very rarely. We've done it once at Voice of San Diego, and it's still a traumatic, like, I'm still upset about it, right? You don't do that. Corrections happen a lot. By the way, if you're ever looking for a credible news organization, you're trying to find out if it's credible or not, just see if they've ever run a correction. Because if they run corrections, they care about the truth.
Yeah.
So he wanted a retraction, full retraction of the piece. And I didn't think it justified that, but I described what he wanted as him demanding a retraction. And he clarified later that he wasn't demanding. He was requesting a retraction.
Okay.
And I don't think that works together. You can't request that something be withdrawn from the public
It's so
record.
You're saying this is egregiously wrong.
That's a demand. Yeah.
Well, I think unless his email was like, hey, just wondering if you could retract this. No worries if not. I mean, that could be like a request for a retraction.
Yeah.
But anything other than that, I feel like that's probably a demand.
All right, you can see everything in the Politics Report at vosd.org/Scott.